Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's meeting of the Rotary E-Club of Silicon Valley. My name is Tzviat Koshirov, and I am the immediate past president of this Rotary Club. Now, this week, we have a very interesting speaker who will be talking to us about a topic that I actually knew absolutely nothing about, semiotics. Onaiza Drabu is an anthropologist, a semiotician, and a writer, and she comes to us from Kashmir. So she'll be telling us a little bit about what she does for her work and all the interesting projects that she's been involved with through that work, through semiotics. So with that, I will pass it over to Onaiza. Onaiza, go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you so much for both having me and for that lovely introduction. I'm really excited to be here. It's funny you said that you know little about semiotics, because that's exactly how I've tailored my presentation for people who know absolutely nothing about it. I'm going to give a brief introduction. And what I will try to do is sort of take you through the theory behind it and then just give a bit of practical examples of how you apply it in your everyday. So if that's okay, I'm going to share my screen now. And yes, yeah, I hope you can see my screen now. Perfect. So I'm going to start with a bit about what semiotics is and how you can leverage it to tell stories for your brands. Or alternatively, this could be titled as How I Make a Living with an Anthropology Degree, which a lot of people ask me. Yes, so what I do is a bunch of things, a bunch of maybe disparate things, seemingly disparate things. I work in digital transformation, which means I help organizations transition online. I do something called cyber ethnography or online ethnography, which basically means a study of internet cultures. I work in semiotics, which is the study of science, and I'll come to it a bit later. And I also write. And I most recently wrote a book on Kashmiri folklore, and I've been thinking about folklore a lot and mythology and why we tell the stories we tell and why we enjoy the stories we enjoy. And that sort of ties all of it together. I think what ties everything I do together is human behavior, human nature, and as well as the impact of technology with all of these. So my familiarity with tech and my degree in anthropology sort of helped me bring all of this together. Very briefly, you would know that anthropology is, you know, the study of humans and human behaviors. And when I say cyber ethnography or digital anthropology, it just means the study of cultures online. It's also a type of social research, but rather than studying it in person, rather than studying sociality in physical interaction, it's studying how people relate to each other online. And this study, I mean, I would have had to explain this far more 6 months ago, but given the pandemic and everything, everyone understands what I mean when I say a study of digital cultures, because now all our sociality is online. We speak to each other online, we congregate online, we discuss opinions online, we work online. So it's just become a bit easier to explain what I do. All of this is deeply tied to, semiotics. Very, very briefly, semiotics is the interpretations of signs. When I say sign, a sign could be anything. A sign could be a word, a sign could be a photograph, a sign could be a picture, a logo, it could be anything we see. And all of these things, whatever we see, every sign has meanings. It's layered at many levels. Every form or fragment of this communication has some meaning. There's an overt meaning, but there's a covert meaning as well. And just interpreting all of this is semiotics. So very simply, in semiotics theory, there's something called a sign, a signifier, and a signified. And it just seems a bit complicated, but if someone shows me an image of a tree, what I see is a photo of a tree. How I understand that it stands for a tree, which is the tree outside my door, is what it signifies. So this symbol sort of signifies something that's a real tangible concept for me. If this is a bit vague, I will completely understand, and I'll come to it a bit later. But what I try and tell people is that my job is to figure out what things say, what words say, because everything around us communicates. There's a narrative in everything, there's a story in everything. We communicate through words, we communicate through body language, through colors, through actions, through music, through stories, narratives, and now through 140 character tweets. We communicate through likes on Instagram, likes on Facebook. We communicate through memes. So all our modes of communication have changed when we go online. And with every sign, as I said, with anything that communicates, a word, an image, an action, a speech, we are encoding information into that, into let's say, a logo. And it is on someone else to decode that message. So in a sense, every bit of communication that we do is constituted of someone encoding something in the message, and then the receiver decoding that bit from the message. There's also a bit about denotation and connotation. And in this, I sometimes I work on understanding racism. And I use this a lot in my study of racism. So let's say someone uses a particular slur word for a particular race. When they say it, they are denoting merely that person, but what they're connoting is a larger cultural baggage. And what this means and what this entails or implies is that you're looking at every mode of communication as something deeper than what the surface level tells you. So every single thing that we do, we hear or listen to, every form of communication needs an interpretation beyond the overt meaning. It needs decoding. And as creators of communication, or as creators of words, images, logos, social media content, we are the interpreters and we are the creators of these signs. So our job, in essence, is to decode the everyday. What we need to do is decode all of these barrage of information that's thrown at us. So we're thrown information on social media, we're thrown information by advertisers, we're thrown information by newspapers, by phones, text messages, every day. But what we need to do is decode this. And as brands, as someone who runs a brand, owns a brand, we need to again recode this information and pass it on. So if I manage social media for my website, I will decode messages from other brands, but again, I recode something into my messaging that I send out to the universe. And all this while I tell a story. I will pause here because I've given a lot of ideas, and I will go into sort of a thought experiment. And I will ask you to think of objects and why objects have value imbued in them. Objects, in a sense, have no value except for the meanings humans endow them with. Humans endow objects with motivations, attributions. They imbue objects with value, essentially. There's a very famous example of how diamonds came to be popular, and how through, this whole, it's essentially just a rock, but how did diamonds, or let's say pearls, become the sensation they are? Just by curators imbuing value into these objects by messaging, by coding. Cigarettes are a popular example where over the years, marketeers have branded cigarettes as liberation for women for a very long time through their advertising, as a socially mobile, upward mobile commodity. Through this attribution to products and brands, we as humans, we as communicators, and we as consumers and producers of information engage in this process of recoding, encoding, decoding all day long without being aware of it. Without being aware of it, we also tell stories for our brands. And now, when I tell you all of this, it seems pretty intuitive. It seems very, very obvious that everyone knows that they need to communicate in a particular way to a particular audience to sell their product. Everyone knows that you don't actually sell products to people. You sell them a better version of themselves. We sell them an idea of who they can be once they consume this product. When you sell aspirational products to people, you're telling them that they're transcending their league and entering another league to actually not just be consumers, but also be different people once they consume this brand. It's the same with luxury brands. It's the same with, let's say, a woke brand or a healthy food brand or, a sporty brand. It's just you're selling them an ideology, you're selling them a story. Seems very intuitive. And it also seems often very silly that someone should be telling you this, but Nike knows this, big brands know this, and they engage in very active and very methodical processes to get to this. But how do small businesses get to it? How do small businesses get to use this methodology on a smaller scale in order to better understand their products and in order to better sell their products? And this is what I'll tell you. So lots of theories so far, but what I'm going to tell you is a few simple methods that I, as a semiotician, employ for brands to help them understand and market their products better to the audience that they're speaking to. And the first one of this is participant observation. Participant observation is a very classic anthropology technique where you embed yourself in a group or society to understand what things mean to them. So if I'm selling a soap brand, I will embed myself with the group that I'm targeting. And I will try and understand what ideas of hygiene mean to them, what notions of cleanliness mean to them, what the experience of just showering means to them, and how I can create something of value for these people. And participant observation is very passive. I'm just there listening in to people, just basically hanging out with some people to understand how they view some things. The second methodology I probably use is interviews and focus groups. And this is more targeted. What I do here is I interview, let's say, 15 people who I think would be potential customers. And I ask them specific questions about their experience, what they do when they wake up, how do they go to the bathroom, is this a part of their daily routine, how do they choose their soap, do they like their soap to lather, do they want their soap, is the experience of showering a haven, is this where they think, how should I frame this? That's the second sort of methodology I use. Very targeted, again, at who's going to be buying my products and how do I tell them a story they want to listen to. The third methodology, which actually has changed things completely, is digital ethnography, which is just listening to people online. So you're probably lurking on Twitter and Instagram, just figuring out and scrolling through timelines of your potential consumers. And just this act of sort of understanding how they think gives you ideas. There's also more tools for it. Something known as natural language processing, NLP, helps you identify or sort of draw large chunks of data related to, again, let's say showering, or from something like a Twitter, and then you make sense of this huge reams of text to understand what the simple act of showering means to some people. And then you sort of create a story with it. Once we have all of this information, once we have ideas and sort of insights from our research, we need to tell stories that others listen to. I read this very interesting book called Hitmakers by Derek Thompson, and his whole thesis is that the best stories in the world out there are the ones that are familiar yet unfamiliar. So he says, he asks you to sort of think of the best essays you have read most recently. They almost always make the points that you agree with. The best jokes are the ones that resonate with your worldview. So he talks about how we're stuck in this struggle between neophilia and neophobia, where people crave new ideas, they crave new products, but they also want them to be very, very similar and like something they already know. And that's where resonance comes in. I mentioned that I work on folklore, and very often I've seen that a folklore from a remote part in Kashmir will be very similar to something from West Africa. And I've often wondered why this storytelling arc is similar. It's probably because these are the most universally engaging and universally appealing stories, where they've been so familiar that they resonate the world over. So resonant storytelling is what we do with the information we've collected. But what are the questions that I answer for consumers, or sorry, for brands? So I think I have just put a few up on screen. These are actually sort of disguised, but real questions that brands have approached me with. So what is the language of consumers of sustainable products in Uganda? In this particular project, a brand wanted to enter the sustainability market in Uganda, and they wanted to understand what is the lingua franca, or the speech register, that bloggers, young millennials who engage in, a sustainable lifestyle or zero waste lifestyle, what is the language they use to speak to each other? Because it always very, very, very different. It's always very, very different in different cultures, in different communities, and in different groups. Then I had another project on what does it mean to have a voice in India today? What is the mere act of having a voice? How do you understand it? How do you understand hygiene in Pakistan? Was again from a hand washing company, a hand washing brand, who wanted to create an advertisement on understanding hygiene in Pakistan. And only when they knew what this meant would they be able to target the product better. In this specific case, Pakistan is a Muslim country. Ideally, you're supposed to pray 5 times a day and perform ablutions 5 times a day. So hand washing also has a religious aspect to it, which would not be the same in, let's say, a European country. Another bit that I investigate is racism. And I did a project on whether TV news makes you racist and leads you, certain TV news makes you racist and leads you to form some particularly leading opinions. And it turns out it does, because sometimes hashtags as signs encourage you to think in a particular way. The last bit is on how one can get young South Asians interested in regional language literature. And this was a personal project for me. And I would want to show a bit about it, and I'll just wrap up with it, because this was a personal project for me. I'd always wondered how I can get younger millennial South Asians interested in regional language literature. Most of this literature is older text, not accessible, not in libraries anymore, very, very rarely online. So I did a bit of a study, and me and my partner understood that the language that the millennials understand is digital. They understand memes, they understand social media, they understand short snippets of text on Instagram, and that's exactly what we did. And in 3 years, we've covered about 150 regional language snippets on our website that we run, and we have 50,000 followers. And it just showed us how a very, very obscure subject, knowing our medium, knowing what resonates, knowing how we can connect better with our readers, can get us traction and completely reinvent what we're trying to do. What we had also tried to do, you'll see in this image, is use semiotics in a way where we wanted to create this whole nostalgic aspect in our design. So we use faded postcards, we send out digital newsletters, but we call it postcards from the attic. We've done this whole stamp thing. We use a typewritten font to sort of create this nostalgic experience that millennials in India somehow love. And it's been really successful for us. And this was a personal project that I could talk about, and I wanted to talk about it. And with that, I think I will pause, because I feel like I've given a lot of information really rapidly, and I know we'll have a lot of questions. So I'll just pause there. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Onaiza. This is really fun. Thanks for sharing a little bit about the different projects and the different questions that you've tried to answer through your work. And also the postcards from the attic. This was good that you included that as well. So before we go into Q&A, I'm just gonna switch here to gallery view and just introduce everyone else that we have on the call. So we have Phil, who is one of our newer members, and he's based in California. We also have Raquel, our club president for this Rotary year. Raquel is currently in Mexico. We have Sandy, who is based in the Bay Area as well. Cecilia, also in Northern California. And then we have a Rotaractor joining us from Ecuador. Adri, thanks for making time to join this recording as well. So with that, before I ask my question. Sorry, go ahead. So before I ask my question, I wanted to just see if there's anyone else that wanted to ask a question first. Cecilia, did you want to start?
Unmute here. So I don't have to start actually, but there was, you kind of struck a nerve with me when, I mean, a good nerve, you know, when you talked about sort of brand identity and, you know, obviously Nike is a well-known brand. Starbucks, let's talk about how they have permeated our entire culture through their marketing. They're just a pretty amazing marketing machine. But if you are a small, very small business, how do you go about figuring out the thing that will get people's attention?
Perfect. Do you have an example that do you have if you give me a business, if you do, if not, I can also just hypothetically answer this.
Well, actually, so before, up until about 5 months ago, I was a Peace Corps volunteer in Ethiopia and teaching English to 11th graders. And of course, now I'm back in the Bay Area because they evacuated all of us back home. But I have teaching experience. I have a teaching English as a foreign language certificate from a well-known university. So if I wanted to go out there and just, you know, either create small classes or individual teaching or whatever, how do it, and it's a big world and there are lots of TEFL teachers out there. What does one do? And I realize this is really a marketing question and I don't want to take up all of the time, but it was just when you said, you know, when you mentioned Nike, it occurred to me, okay, they got into people's mind in a certain way by doing certain things. And so, and now of course the swoosh, we all know that means Nike. The Starbucks symbol, which I think is rather complicated, everyone, almost everyone in the world knows about it because you see Starbucks stores everywhere. Anyway, just curious.
Yeah. No, that's actually a really, really interesting example and also a really difficult one because you're doing a lot of personal branding here, but also not, you know, if you have a brand, if you, let's say, are a coffee roastery, people are going to follow you for coffee tips, etc., etc. I was having a similar conversation with a friend who's a poet and who wants to teach poetry and she doesn't know how to start. So what I did was tell her to start an Instagram account, and I would tell you, or a Twitter account or something like some social media account, where you regularly give out tips on learning English as a foreign language. So very short snippets, just documenting your journey, sharing your experiences, probably sharing older photos, notes from the classroom. So building a story around your experience as a English as a foreign language teacher. I've seen Twitter do wonders for this. I'm taking a course on where a teacher decided to create a course on love, on you know, the philosophy of love, and she just sent out a tweet. She has about 100 followers on Twitter, nothing big. And she said, hey, I've always wanted to do this. This has been a passion. This is what I've done all my life. And she created a long Twitter thread and said, this is what I'm going to be teaching. If you want to ever reach out to my previous students, I'd love for them to retweet this. So a lot of her previous students retweeted it. She got about like 500 retweets. And not a lot of people signed up to the course, about 30, 40, but which is also incredible for a teacher you don't know. And you're paying for, you know.
You
It's
just
I
gave,
think it's a
you just,
$100 course.
wow, you just gave me the first reason I've ever heard why I should have a Twitter account. Because here in the United States, those of us who have not been, I mean, I'm not in that generation, obviously, and I'm so appalled by what goes on that we hear about all the time on Twitter that I have purposely avoided it. Even though in a different innovative teaching class that I took, we were required, well, we were supposed to set up a Twitter account, which I didn't do. There was one other student who was same thing. I'm not interested in being in the Twitterverse, but you do make a great point about that. And so anyway, thank you.
You're welcome, because you're actually talking about, your life story, and then you can build on it. You can just put out the first 10 tweets, or even if you want to do Instagram, you can do Instagram. Both of these platforms help people amplify each other's voice. And Twitter is great for it because you really don't need to have a big following for you to sort of go viral or for your story to be widely read. Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you. Sorry. Sorry, Sviako. I took your time here.
No, this was good discussion. Does anyone else have a question of Onaiza? Okay, so let me go then. So Onaiza, my question is around digital communication. And now that we have so many brands or even organizations where the people that they're trying to reach, that audience would naturally be global. So it would be people that, or even if they're based in a specific location, the audience would be quite diverse from, different age groups, people that come from different, political, social backgrounds, all sorts of things. Now, how do you manage the challenge of not being misunderstood with your message based on, cultural perceptions that may already exist? So if you are a brand that has an audience that's that broad, how do you go around that?
So that is actually something that I know everyone struggles with, and that is a very difficult question to answer. My answer to that would be that there's always going to be someone who will, we're living in a cancel culture age. So someone will somewhere be offended, take offense, even if you mean absolutely nothing by anything. So there's always going to be, if you have 50,000 followers, there's always going to be 10 people who will take deep offense to you saying absolutely nothing or just breathing. We live in this really, in this age where wokeness has gone a bit far, and there's a lot of backlash against cancel culture, which is coming up. So I think for that, you need to, as long as your messaging is clear and you have factual backing to it, and you have, it sounds okay to you and it sounds okay to a few of the people around you. I always do sanity checks with people around me. And if if 2 or 3 people with diverse opinions don't have a problem with it and don't see it as problematic, I go with it. I just go with it and I try and explain it, because sometimes trolls will always troll you for the reason of absolute kicks, and they will really want nothing but to troll, because that's their personality. They just want you to engage. So it's best not to engage, and it's best to just try and be as diplomatic with your messaging. I saw a very interesting, it's very embedded in the cultural context, but I saw a very interesting tweet where it tried to balance 2 things very subtly without really saying anything. And someone was like, oh, look at this is problematic. And I said, no, it's actually perfect, because he's not pleasing anyone, but not offending anyone either. But all the same, saying really nothing, but he's balancing both. Yeah. So that's a very difficult question. I would, I would say just whatever's good with you, just go with it.
Yeah, thanks. Those are good tips. That was a very difficult question.
No, but sanity checks with a few people.
Yeah. I think I'm consistently finding that. So I work with clients from different cultures, and even if we take just our Rotary Club as an example, we have people from all walks of life, from all over the world, really. And and sometimes it's challenging when, you know, your messaging obviously isn't something that anyone should be offended by, but it unintentionally might result as something like that. Cool. Before we wrap things up, does anyone have a last question they want to ask? Okay, so let's leave the rest of the discussion for when we end the recording. So with that, thank you everybody for joining us this week. Don't forget to leave a comment or question in the discuss section at the very bottom of this page. And also fill out the attendance survey. If you are visiting us from another Rotary Club, this will also trigger an email receipt that you can present to your secretary and use your attendance here today as a makeup. So with that, I will turn it over to Onaiza for a final message for our club.
Thank you so much. I actually had a very controversial final message because we've been talking about science. This very famous semiotician, Umberto Eco, says that, you know, because science have meanings, they can also be used to lie. So always be wary of what science tell you. That is my message, yeah.
Very good, real message. Thank you so much, Onaiza. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you next week.